lived in Switzerland for the last 8 years. I worked for over 10 years in Silicon Valley in innovation, working also on a lot of sustainable projects, mostly on the White House initiative, mostly for President Obama at that time. And then I ran innovation project in Southeast Asia, and I'm really happy for the last 8 years to work on Kickstart, which is focusing on connecting corporates and startups with more and more of sustainability focus. So that's kind of about me. Manuel, would you like to say maybe a few words about yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. So my name is Manuel. I'm from Zurich. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Oxygen at Work. I will tell you later a bit more about what we do. Before that, I was working at Credit Suisse in their open innovation, or actually growth innovation department for corporate and investment banking, working on partnerships and collaboration opportunities with fintech and other startups. And yeah, before that I was studying at University of St. Gallen and London School of Economics. That's more or less about me.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And then if we go next, so I was hoping to share a little bit about Kickstart innovation, but kind of from the level of to really understand kind of maybe some of the case studies that we have had over the years. And then we hope that Manuel can give us more a little bit presentation as one of the case studies is Oxygen at Work. And then again, we'll go through the do's and don'ts and the Q&A. So what Kickstart is that we really believe that to work on the open innovation ecosystem and connecting later stage startups. For us, it's usually startups in the funding of a seed, Series A, Series B, and connecting them with different institutions. We work with organizations from public sector as well as private. So it's not only corporates, it's also cities, cantons, foundations, and so on. We are spin-off of Impact Hub Zurich, and you might know the Impact Hub network, which has over 100 locations all around the world. So we really focus on that level. Many of you, I believe, are based in Normandy. So there's also Impact Hub in Geneva and Lausanne. So I hope that you engage on that level. As Kickstart, we do 3 things. One is develop these innovation partnerships. And this is kind of interesting to work on the platform to really bring or make the process hopefully faster for the startups to connect with the corporates and gain them as a client, as well as give opportunities to corporates to innovate and really find great solutions through the startups to accelerate also, of course, on the different topics. We also have work on internal teams. So it's basically Swisscom will set internal teams to Kickstart and we help them to accelerate in 10 weeks. And so there's been really kind of, I would say, through the process to really kind of go through that of being real entrepreneur for 10 weeks. So we usually have them to join our program and kind of go through those different levels. And then, of course, we engage through different other special projects like hackathons and much more. If you're interested, of course, to learn, we'd be really happy to answer that a little bit later. We focus on multiple areas. So the focus areas is fintech, edtech, food, health tech, and smart city. What is common for all of the areas, it's that we work in deep tech and circular economy, and then entrepreneurship also is touching all of those topics. As I mentioned, we work with many different corporates and organizations, so this is kind of interesting to see kind of the ecosystem, and maybe this is one of the learnings for us is because you might be asking and say, hey, there's a lot of corporates that they have their own internal processes and their innovation centers and departments. What we learned about is was really great to build this ecosystem because it's not only platform for them to connect with the startups, but also learn from each other and kind of build things together. So this is something that I think is really important to build the ecosystem around you as a startup or corporate. And we definitely see kind of huge advantage of that. And it's not only connected to, I would say, the partners as itself, it's also in connection to field experts and investors and much more. So far, we have worked with 5,000 startups all around the world and brought over 200 of them to Switzerland. Next to other programs, we engage, I would say, 70% of international startups, so coming from anywhere, and 30% of local startups, so Swiss. For us, it's really kind of the feedback we get is to kind of open doors and really make the, I would say, lean process. And I think this is kind of later on also to say, hey, working with corporate is not always easy if you don't know how to do it or to have the experience. And so it's really great to maybe utilize some of the programs or platforms to do so, and also learn from the different levels that we'll be sharing today. Our startups raised over 850 million so far. So as you can see, it's really kind of also supporting them in different stages. Like you may know Planted, which was just going through the Series 17. And we help them through the POCs to scale through Switzerland with Coop and Migros, as well as, for example, through the sustainable solutions in the past year, like Yova, who just got quite a big funding in sustainable finance and scaling now beyond Switzerland. As you can see here, we have Oxygen at Work, but I will not speak about it too much because I'm sure Manu will cover that later. The solutions are quite different. So if you look at, for example, Planted, as you know, it's in the food. Omocom last year was coming to us from Nordics, actually, in sustainable insurance. So it really depends, and interesting how many topics are really, I would say, growing. All of our solutions are not sustainable because we still focus a lot on the deep tech, but we can see huge trend of increasing of that topic year by year. And so we hope to also move, of course, in that direction. I spoke about some of the examples, like one of them is also really interesting. It's a Labster, which is focusing on kind of empowering students through visual labs. And that one you probably have seen maybe in Switzerland, but also they actually been scaling through all Europe. Yes? Cool. I think it just heard sounds good. And speaking of that, I think that was the little intro of Kickstart, but I think we'd like to more deep dive of the special cases. So Manuel, maybe can you tell us a little bit more about Oxygen at Work, and then we'll kind of look at the best practices.
Sure. So thank you, Katka, for inviting me to this session, and welcome everybody from my side as well. So I will just take a few minutes to tell you a bit more about Oxygen at Work and what we do, so you better understand my background and where I'm coming from for the discussion and conversation coming thereafter. So at Oxygen at Work, we are all about creating healthy spaces, mainly focusing on offices. And the main focus point is indoor air quality. Next slide, please. All right, thanks. But when we talk about indoor air quality, it's important to understand that it's like all spaces are basically embedded into an urban ecosystem. So you have a building that is interacting with the outdoor environment, with the traffic, with the trees, with the other buildings, weather, etc. And all of it has an impact on your particular building where you are based inside. Next slide, please. But the inside is as complex as the outdoor world. So you see on the bottom left, you see the impact from the outdoor, but then looking around the room here, you.
Guys, if I can ask, if you are speaking, if you can please mute, this will be super helpful. Thank you so much. Sorry, Manu.
Thank you, Katka. So you see it's as complex indoors as well. You see the impact of computers, of paint, carpet, of the people. And if we go to the next slide, you see that we also have an impact of natural plants, which tends to be overlooked when you start planning a new space. But there are several impacts in terms of pollutant uptake and emissions of humidity, for example, but also noise reduction, which is important to take into account when looking at this. So when we go to the next slide again, then we see it all put together. with the plants, the people, etc., and it becomes very very complex to manage. Next slide, please. And there, so now looking on the left-hand side, when we manage such a space, we have different types of goals and targets that we want to achieve. We want it to be safe and healthy for all the space users or tenants, but we also want it to be sustainable and energy efficient. But they all have different, they all point into different directions, and it's really hard to find the right balance between these goals. So one example we see on the right hand side when we look at relative humidity, multiple studies show that with a relative humidity of 40 to 60%, the lifetime of bacteria, viruses, etc. are minimized, which has been very important, obviously, over the last 1.5 years. But from a sustainability perspective or comfort perspective, it's better to have a bit lower relative humidity. So here you see already the dilemma that most building managers or construction companies, etc., are in. Next slide, please. And the result will be that in most spaces, actually, you have either one or multiple of the negative impacts that we see here on the right hand side. So people are not happy, they don't feel well, or are not healthy, or the building simply uses way too much energy than that it needs to. Next slide. This is basically where we come in, by really understanding what's happening outdoor, what's happening indoor, what's happening with the people, with the plants, with the ventilation system, with the computers, etc. Really understanding all of this and then holistically optimizing it, but with a very particular focus also on the natural plants, because there are a lot of companies that can that understand ventilation systems very well. That there are a lot of companies that understand the weather very well. However, there are not many companies out there that really understand the plants, and so that's why we focus a lot of that and then really bring it all together. Next slide. So what do we actually offer to our partners and companies? It's I would say it's threefold, not fourfold, as we see here. So first of all, we support architects and engineers when planning new spaces by really calculating the right selection and positioning of plans to ensure the achievement of certain goals, for example, relative humidity goals. So we then calculate it based on the space parameters, volume, etc. What types of ventilation systems do they have, etc. And then we have a whole service around plant supply and maintenance, where we actually provide what we were planning in the first step, and make sure that we reach those goals. And in order to do that, we also need to measure what we want to achieve. So we use indoor air quality devices, which you'll see here on the right-hand side of the slide. This is where the whole monitoring and optimization solution actually comes into place. So we have a very detailed platform to really analyze the indoor air quality on multiple levels in terms of health, for example, neurological health, dermatological health, etc. And in terms of well-being, in terms of safety, for example, the risk of airborne viruses or fire safety, etc. To really go into the details there, and then over time optimize it together with our clients. So now you can just, Katka, you can just scroll a little bit through the next few slides, just so you see a few of the impressions of projects that we did. So it's not only pure tech, but also nature, to make it much more, the space is much nicer, which is also important in terms of mental health. And on, well, yeah, to finish it up and wrap it up, here a list of some of our of the companies we work with. You see it's mainly large international corporates that really take care of their employees, but also have high sustainability goals. And actually a few of those are our clients, thanks to Kickstart, for example, ABB and Cognizant here, which we are very happy about. And yeah, I think with the next slide, the only remaining thing is our vision or mission statement, what we stand for. And yeah, with that, I'm done with the brief introduction of what we do.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ronald. Maybe we can jump in and to say, does anybody have a question so far about Kickstart or about Oxygen at Work? Any questions there? Please just unmute and speak up. So far, so no? Fantastic. Maybe we can, if you do, then just let us know. We can maybe kind of speak about, Manuel, so when you speak about, I will speak about some do's and don'ts, but what if you will boiling that kind of, let's say, first 3 learnings for you, what it will be kind of, we'll say maybe the most obvious ones, and I'm sure we'll deep dive even more. Yes.
3 learn things in terms of
working with corporates.
Working with
or investors, yes.
Or investors. Okay, so I think it's important to really differentiate between investors and corporates. Those are very different worlds. Let me start with corporates first. So I mean, I got both. I got to see both worlds. First, when I was working at Credit Suisse, I was on the corporate side, and now I'm on the startup side. And I think the key learning there is what most startups underestimate are the internal processes of corporates, which there is simply in most cases no way around. It's really important to kind of develop a feeling for how do these processes work, how long do they take, who needs to get involved on the corporate side. Because there is no point in pushing one single person who cannot decide him or herself if they have to follow a certain process. So and it's also very common to talk with corporates openly about it and ask them, okay, how does it work on your end? Like, what do you need to do? Can I support you in any way? Are there any critical stages that we need to get through? And I think if you can really develop this understanding and this feeling for these processes, you're in a good position to make deals with corporates. And maybe to follow up, just in terms of investors, this is a very different type of deal making, let's say. And I always like to compare it to a dance of 2 people, of a couple. But the problem in this particular dance is that you have 2 people and both want to lead. So it can get quite tricky, because you as a startup obviously want to lead into a certain direction, show all the good things that you have and what you believe are the important aspects that you want to talk about, and maybe don't talk about the critical aspects. And obviously the investor has his own idea in what direction he wants to dance and wants to talk about. And this is the whole problem when you, in my opinion, when you talk to investors, because you kind of need to guide the conversation into the direction you want it to go, but you still need to somehow follow their path, because they will never ever do an investment decision by simply following what you tell them without going into the details that they want to see. So it's very tricky to follow this path. And ideal setup, you as a startup are capable of guiding them by giving them the feeling of being in the lead. But there is here again, and I think there is, you can compare it to corporates, there is no point in pushing them and pressuring them, or like putting some time pressure, etc., or even let's say denying some kind of answers, or not talking about the critical aspects, because in the end the investors also want to see how what additional potential there is to further improve the business, to do the next steps. And if you're in a position where you simply deny it and want to put the business presented in perfect shape, you're not going to be in a very good this or negotiation position with the investors anymore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a little bit how I see these two worlds.
Thank you so much for sharing. I will now go through like some of the points that I observed, also with feedback from my colleagues, and then let's go through the wild discussion. But I really liked your point about the dance of two leads. I feel that I experience that also on a daily basis. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, so kind of the do's and don'ts, I really try to make it to really boil of the points that we can see, and maybe in the same time also maybe see it in general way that can help with any startup or any organization trying to work with stakeholders like corporates, other partners, as well as investors. One is, I think this one I had bold, and then I have to say then I a little bit made it a little bit more lean, was I say it's not about you, it's about the pain points. I think a lot of startups that we see will kind of say, hey, this is my solution and this is what I have to convince someone to do. And then when we look at these POCs and commercial projects, we kind of see, hey, it really needs to make sense that it's also a solution and it's needed actually for the corporate or for the partner. And so this is something that it's really important to kind of for you to think of the potential client, actually, what are their points and how you're solving it? Like, what is your organization actually as a solution? And so I would say kind of the first one for me that we see a lot, because I would say we even make those mistakes on our own to say we really believe in what we do and everyone should love it. But I think in the end of the day, it's a lot about practicality also, like actually what are the other stakeholders doing. The second one is kind of to have strong vision and to kind of to see your why, because I think it is not easy to run startups or kind of push for your idea, and you definitely need to believe your vision and you need to be really clear on your vision. It's really something that you should. I see a lot of startups who, when they're explaining their kind of vision or mission, is quite complicated, and so really try to make it really easy and lean, because you will be mentioning that many times and it needs to be really understood. And so I would say we live also in the culture, especially in Switzerland, where people are really polite to ask. So just also ask people and to say, hey, today I really understand, and just making sure that the storyline is really something that it's clear to them. One is that I see this a lot. I live many years in the US, and then moving to Switzerland, I felt like a lot of startups stay very on the ground, which is great. I really love that culture. A lot of startups were really hard, but I think it's really important to think kind of big and also global. And so how your business could potentially scale, and how can you really think of solutions that, yes, of course, we always hear think globally and act locally, but I would say also it's really important to think of the ways how can you scale something that it's, I think, really important pretty early on, actually, when you're especially scaling to other ecosystems, other countries, and etc. One is kind of focus. I feel all of us always kind of learn that as entrepreneurs, because we do many different. Hi, can we? Okay, good. It's focus. There's as entrepreneurs, there's a lot to do. We can do, and there's a lot of opportunities. But end of the day, it's really a lot kind of the focus where we want to be. And so I would really recommend that. Sometimes it's hard to decide. Like, hey, do you take this opportunity and kind of go with it? But I think many times, actually, if you figure out what you need to do, and also get, I would say, the advisors and all. Everyone around to help you, and it makes a huge difference. Actually, it will also help you to actually I would say do less, but in the end there will be so much more. So I think we see that a lot with partnerships, and also not being scared to tell the corporate sometimes no. We had I'll give you one example. We had one startup. There was a solution in AI. It was the first year of the program, and there was a negotiation in the partnership, and the corporate said, well, we will have to work with you, but we cannot really give you access to our data. And this was basically kind of the main point of this POC, or the proof of concept. And so I remember I was advising that startup, and they said, okay, what we should do? And I said, well, I think you should be very honest and say, here, either you will give us access to the data, or unfortunately we cannot do this proof of concept. And I remember they were so scared. They were like, no, we cannot say no. This is one of the largest corporates in Switzerland, and this is just not going to work. And I said, it's so much worse to actually go through the project and do a good job, because it's going to also affect you, versus actually kind of getting that. And so in that time, they said no. They actually got a lot of other deals. And even I heard as a feedback 2 years later from the corporate to say, yes, we made a mistake. We really should provide this data in that time. So, there's a kind of example that sometimes actually focusing and also having the guts to say no to some things can actually lead to a lot of great things. So I also wanted to encourage you to do that, because I know it's not easy, but it's really important. This one is my team always makes jokes about me, because I say this pretty much every day, to kind of turn any challenge to opportunity. And so I really believe in this so strongly, that people always will tell you what you cannot do and what's not possible until it is possible. And really, it can be frustrating when you hear no's, or we don't hear kind of things that are not working. But I think this is just great opportunity to pivot or change and try different things, and then kind of turn it around to your advantage. And so I really will encourage that. We had that, for example, that we will be declined on some of the projects, but at the same time, actually it opened door to different direction to even bigger projects. And so I think it's important to not give up, and always kind of have the plan A, B, C, D. I grew up in Eastern Europe, and our plan never worked, because anytime you go in, something will not work. And so you always had to have a plan B, C, D. And I think it's really great skill to have, because you always feel, hey, there's an option to actually go to next station or the next destination to try and do so. And I would say kind of change and pivot as much as needed. I think this is kind of I see that a lot, that a lot of the startups are really scared to pivot or change, actually. And I think sometimes of course, it can be for your product, it can be for your company, it can be for your focus. But I see that a lot, actually, all the time. And I would really encourage to be like, hey, don't be afraid to actually look at the different ways that can be really beneficial to you through pivoting. And I would say there's a lot of underestimate that when you have a startup, you absolutely love it. And of course, you think it's the best thing ever. However, I think, as I spoke about, the storytelling is really also important to invest kind of in the marketing and storytelling, and in the way how you are explaining really what your business is doing about. It's about, I wrote here kind of, it's not about your solution. Yes, of course it is. It should still be kind of in the way that it functions and is there. But I would just also say, it's a lot of more than that. If you have amazing technology, it will not sell on itself. It really needs also, additional things next to it. And I would say storytelling and kind of having really clear vision, mission, looking at also encouraging experts in the marketing and in the strategy is really important. So we're really encouraging that. And then one thing is that I hear is a lot is kind of the estimation of the time and the money, and that goes through, I would say, yes, the corporate deals, but also investments. I hear from a lot of startups to be like, hey, it's going to be easy because I just get the seed funding and then I get grant and I will be funded for a really long time. Well, the reality is that the money goes out very fast, actually, if you really are scaling and growing your startup. And so please don't underestimate that, and kind of be ready for the journey that I would say investor advises always that you will probably need a little bit more money than you think that you will need. And so I think this is something that is really interesting for you to consider. There's also a lot of startups who are basically spending a lot of time on raising funds. You see that, like, going through a lot of rounds. And I think this is something that's really important to be also educated a little bit about and plan that, because it's really connected to your evaluation and kind of liquidity, as well as kind of the planning of the growth of the company. So this is something that I would really say it's also really, I would say, evaluated, of course, by the investors, but also it can affect you, like, from getting some of the deals that you can see. And the last one, I would just say, enjoy the journey. So I've been through a lot of, I would say, deals and presentations. I always love kind of the pictures when you look at kind of what are our plans, then everything will go really perfectly. And kind of the universe has a little bit different plans for you. And why I'm saying this is more just that I hear and see a lot of founders who say, I'm just going to work super hard for like 3 years, and then I'm going to make the millions, and then I'm going to, surf in Hawaii. And we kind of say, hey, this is kind of like, it's more about the journey, actually, and kind of, and so please don't forget also to kind of have, I would say, the personal life, and then kind of looking at that as an adventure. That's probably more like a marathon. It's not a sprint. And because even, the lower picture is kind of funny, it definitely feels like it as an entrepreneur, that it will not always go really smooth and straight. And it's really important to have the ecosystem around you, and also take it as, hey, this is a great learning opportunity, actually, for the time that is there. So those are, I would say, kind of the main points that we collected over time, but we will have to, number one, hear experience, but also maybe you have specific questions that we can both answer. And Manuel, I don't know if you wanted to add to anything to what I just said, but I think I saw your face, so I think you were agreeing with many of those points. So.
Yeah, it'd be hard for me to add anything to that with your year-long experience and all the cases you saw with all the startups that joined Kickstart.
Thank you. Cool. So making good questions and answers. Do we have someone from the audience who is interested in questions? Maybe I will stop sharing so I can see you guys, and I can also see the chat. So, yes. So any questions? You can also just unmute and ask if you can hear us or see us.
I may have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, like, when you want to do a partnership or work with a company, a big company, like, how do you start? How do you reach out to the company? Who do you reach out in the company? And also, I would like to know a bit, what are they looking like? How are they choosing if they are going to work with you or not? Like, what are the main things they're looking?
So I can say, like, with Kickstart, this is kind of our job to try to make it a little bit easier. And so we work really closely with the corporates to ask them what kind of challenges they have. As I'm American, I call it opportunities. And to kind of find the startups, to really connect to that and have the possibility to find the right POC or commercial partnership. I think I will let Manuel also to maybe answer, because a lot of experience, I'm sure, in that next to Kickstart. I think it's important. It's really hard to find always the right contact, because especially in the corporates, it can be a lot of people and it takes you a lot of time. So I would say, please also bet on maybe programs like Kickstart, but also personal introductions and the networks. I think this is really important. And also know what you want to accomplish, because it's much easier to kind of, I would say, explain that and kind of going from there. And what we have done is, like, we work with corporates and basically specifically want to work on the partnership. So this is something that's a little bit easier for us, but it takes really a long time to develop. I mean, it took us 6 years to really have, I would say, the great network that we have now. And that's maybe also easier, let's say, for the startups to collaborate in that way. So yeah. But Manuel, what will be your answer or suggestion?
My answer is very classic. It depends. But first of all, I want to say it. I mean, the programs like Kickstart, etc., they're very valuable, and I'm not saying that because Katka is here, but just simply looking at how it helped us. So what I mentioned before, ABB and Cognizant, which we won as accounts, are now two of our biggest customers and accounts. And you know, during the program, it's only about creating the spark, but then it's all the work that happens afterwards to really build up those accounts over time. But just to get it, you know, to accelerate the first bit, it's very helpful to go through such programs. But in terms of to come back to your question, I think it depends what you want to achieve, and because most corporates by now, they have some kind of first contacts for startups or like startup relationship teams that are scouting a little bit and looking what interesting solutions out there. And I'm not a big fan of those teams. I hope no such person is here. But no, actually, I had such a position in my previous life as well, and it's very hard. You are put in a very difficult position because usually, if you have such a job, you don't really have any budgets or responsibilities to really push any projects forward. And I'm saying that because I believe it really depends what type of project do you want to achieve. Is it just like you want to run a PLC and that's it, and get maybe, you know, access some of the resources from the corporate and have some good marketing? Then it's perfect to talk to these people, and they will be able to help you. However, if you're looking at more longer term relationships, commercial relationships, real strategic partnerships or client supplier relationships, I think it's very crucial that you are talking to the people that are in the business and will be actually benefiting from what you have to offer to them. And that's what we see as well. Like there is a big difference also in those programs like Kickstart, or for example, we also participated in Mass Challenge in Renault. And you really see the difference between those corporates where like the startup people join and those where actually the people of the business join and are interested in bringing their business forward. So on a more longer term perspective, I would always try to reach out to the people directly in the business, and it never hurts to go as high up in the hierarchy as possible. It's always worth a shot.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Cool. I see some questions in the chat, so I'm try. What do you think about crowdfunding platforms for entrepreneurship? So, Manuel, if you want to start this time, and I will comment after.
So, I mean, for me, it's very hard to answer this question because we are a B2B startup, and this is not necessarily the right type of business that suits crowdfunding. If it's more about B2C, you might have a better fit. But I personally don't have too much experience with that, only from hearsay from some of my entrepreneurial peers. So unfortunately, I cannot add too much value to this question. Sorry for that.
No worries. I can maybe add to this one because I worked with one of the startups which was B2C, and we did crowdfunding campaigns and then also had investors next to that. And it was really great for us to validate and to see kind of the customer feedback, because it's really, I would say, live and you really see where you are at right away. However, I think it's better in the beginning of the stages, because then, of course, if you are growing or scaling, usually you probably need additional investments. And so it's really should be for your portfolio strategy. And with the crowdfunding, I think it can be really interesting. It can be also very fast way how to actually kind of gain that. But I will also tell you, it seems to be very easy, but it's actually a lot of work. So I think also evaluate maybe how much you invest of your time and energy and resources of the investments, because we had to do really huge marketing campaigns and videos and just quite a production to kind of go through that process, as well as then, of course, to the whole process of what do you do when the customers, when they actually sign up and kind of go from there. So I think this is something that I really would encourage you to evaluate kind of the input output on that focus. So yeah, I hope that helped. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Are there any additional questions? Maybe that. See it here from the messages. Anybody? All right, I think I can see another one here actually. What are kind of the risks with the investors that you can talk about? I know, can you maybe speak about some examples from your experience?
The risks. So, I mean, what I see, one of the biggest risks is that that investors take too potential investors taking too much of your time, that end up that won't end up actually investing in your company. And what I mean, we did this mistake ourselves as well, but I see it very often is that in the first moment, investors or very often you actually get positive feedback, because usually you have an interesting story to tell, etc. And you start focusing all your efforts on one particular, or maybe just a small number of investors, and this is a huge risk because you can never be sure how it will end, like the whole process. So, for example, we had one where I was 90% sure that they will invest and with very positive terms for us. And I was only waiting for the final confirmation from their side. And what happened was that the key person had a skiing accident, and he was out of office for, I don't know, half a year. So it was a really bad accident. But he was out of office, and then he simply sent me an email. I had a skiing accident. I still have some questions left, but we can't continue. I'm sorry for that. All the best. And so this is very unfortunate, and obviously I was very sorry for him. But it really showed that you always need to have multiple options out there and talk to as many people as possible. Because yeah, I mean, so many things can happen along the process, and you don't want to be in this position where I was, where your key opportunity had an accident and had to say no because of that.
Yeah, I think this is, I think it's maybe also a follow-up question or kind of interesting is to say how many investors do you need to talk to? Because I hear all the time like startups to be like, oh, I just need 5 good investors. and I then have also startups who, you know, like yesterday we had a presentation from Ava and kind of to speak about their funding and said, hey, you should talk to at least 100 investors because then it kind of goes down, then half of them respond to your message and 20 maybe want to talk to you. And so you go really fast to the numbers, actually quite low. What is your experience of how many investors would you recommend to talk to? So
I think it depends how much of your own due diligence and research you do before reaching out to them. If you are too lazy or you don't want to do the full research, obviously you need probably 20 or 30 times more contacts than the number of investors you actually need in the end. If you do a little bit of research, I still believe you need about 10 times more. So if you need five investors in the end, you should reach out to approximately 50 people. But then I think it's especially tricky in the beginning. Like the very first round is the trickiest one, and you should not limit the number of emails you send out. So I don't remember, but I probably sent out something between 70 and 100 emails for our very first round. And it was the investors that ended up investing in our company. It was actually very random. They were not even like in my I didn't imagine those would be the ones joining our journey. But then obviously with every additional round, it gets easier because you can also tap into the networks of your active investors and you developed a better understanding of who might be a good fit for your type of business and business model. So then you will get much more efficient. But in the beginning, I think you shouldn't limit the number of investors you reach out to.